Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more geography now, and this time we are on to Mongolia. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Got nothing to add here at the beginning of Mongolia. We know this place. It's a place that, you know, got plains and stuff, horses. Nearly conquered conquered much of the world at one point. Aside from that, they haven't really been doing too much, I don't think, in recent times. At least no world conquest in relatively recent times. So let's go ahead and dive right in.
Now, you guys know I'm half Korean. If you don't know much about East Asia, basically, putting aside all the political differences, at the end of the day, the nearly 2 billion of East Asians, like Koreans, Japanese, and Chinese, are distant cousins. Then little Mongolia comes in with less than 3 million people, and they step on the scene, and it's like, oh, hey, Grandpa.
It's time to learn geography.
Now!
Hey everyone, I'm your host Barbs. You may have heard a little bit about this guy, mostly through the massive empire from Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan. But Mongolia is unique in that it's kind of like the kindred root that billions of people stem from all over the world. And it all starts on some grassy hills that we will locate in...
Bum, bum, bum.
Mongolia is known as the land of the eternal blue sky as they get over 250...
God, I fucking love that name. Ugh. That's such a good name for a land. Land of the eternal blue sky. Oh, fucking beautiful. Poetic. No comment. No correction needed. I don't know. I was thinking of something I couldn't think of the phrase.
sunny days a year. They really are kind of like the center of Asia, even though technically the actual geographic center of Asia is claimed by 3 spots, 2 in Russia, 1 in China. But Mongolia is really close to all 3 of them. Anyway, Mongolia is a landlocked country, the 18th largest in the world, located in center East Asia, bordered by Russia and China. If it wasn't for this very narrow 23-mile long corridor, they would also touch Kazakhstan, but they don't. The country is divided into 21 provinces, or aymags, with the capital Ulaanbaatar, meaning Red Hero, in the northeast, acting as its own municipality with provincial status. Literally all roads in the country eventually lead up to this one city, one way or another. Oh, and it has this really cool looking curved sky tower building. Fun fact,
Nice.
Ulaanbaatar, spelled a variety of different ways depending on how you look at it, is the world's coldest capital, and it was actually a nomadic city that moved 28 times before settling in its current location. The city in itself holds about 45% of the entire country's population and holds the only international airport, Genghis Khan International, and a new airport is being built on the other side of the mountain, so far just called New Ulaanbaatar International. It has almost nothing around it, so good luck. Otherwise, the second and third largest cities are Erdenet and Darkhan, located relatively close to Ulaanbaatar. Now, Mongolia is kind of interesting because although they don't have territorial disputes, they do have some interesting border demarcations, such as the narrow western slot of Lake Buir shared with China. Russia gets a small slice of Ufs Lake. On the east, you can find a tri-point monument for China, Russia, and Mongolia at Tarbaganda, and plans for a possible western tri-point marker on the peak of Mount Tavanbogdo-Ula are on the way. The country has a main railway that transects the north to south, entering both Russia and China. This also connects to the larger well-known Trans-Siberian Railway in Russia. More lines are planned to be built in the future, but for now, almost the entire western part of Mongolia is only accessible by crude roads and paths, or, you know, horse trail. Yeah, we'll get into the horse thing later. Anyway, now when I say Mongolia, obviously I'm referring to what constitutes the boundaries of modern-day state Mongolia. Keep in mind though, historically, the regions of what are now Inner Mongolia that belong to China, or the People's Republic of China, were part of the larger Mongolia region, and today has more ethnic Mongols than actual Mongolia. Coming to Mongolia, you'll probably be hit with a lot of interesting sights, especially with Genghis Khan. You know him, he's everywhere.
No, I've never heard of
Statues,
him.
buildings, carvings on hillsides. The airport is actually named after him. He's even on their money. Some notable sites of interest might include places like all these museums, the Bod Palace, Ichberhant Complex, the Taihar Stone, the Shambhala Stupa structure. The locals kind of consider it like the center of energy for the universe. Of course, there are so many hundreds of different monasteries like these, including the oldest one, Erdenezu. And of course, there's the pride and glory statue, the Sonjin Bulldog Genghis Khan statue. But the thing Mongolia is probably known most for is not the handmade landmarks, but rather the vast open expanses of grassland where all the power began. Which brings us to... Remember that universal wallpaper for all Windows monitors back in like 1997? It had that serene rolling green hill. That's kind of what comes to mind when I think of Mongolia's landscape. Fun fact, it got converted into a vineyard. Anyway, Mongolia lies on the center of Asia, sandwiched between the Gobi Desert in the south, and there are three main small mountain chains. The Altai in the west, where you can find the tallest peak, Hutian on the border with China, the Hangai Mountains in the north, where you can find the deepest freshwater lake, Hovsgol. However, the hypersaline lake Uvs has more surface area. In between these two mountain chains lies the Valley of Lakes, where most of Mongolia's natural lakes lie. And finally, the Hentil in the north, which is where the longest river, the Orkhon, flows, sourced by Lake Baikal in the Buryat Republic of Russia. Basically, if you want the overall summary, the south is a dry, cold desert, the north is greener and hillier with grassy hills and water, and the entire country is subjugated to the massive atmospheric pressure zone known as the Siberian anticyclone. This is a huge, cold, dry air mass with massive pressure that accumulates between September and April, usually centered around Lake Baikal, and it grows as far as Italy in the west and Malaysia to the south. In a nutshell, this is what keeps Mongolia generally windier and chillier, even though they get lots of sunshine with little snow. Basically, it's a very dry landmass, and the rainiest spots only get about 14 inches of rain a year at best. Weird, right? Dry but cold. In fact, the only natural disaster that they face would be the Zud, or a harsh climatic condition that causes massive amounts of livestock to die off due to freezing conditions and starvation. Also keep in mind the Gobi Desert is the source of the eastern winds that causes all the dust storms that fly all the way across eastern Asia. In the Korea episode I explained this. It's called Hwangsa. Alright, this is my triple shot of espresso break. Usually Noah comes in, but his car broke down so he can't make it here. Ken, just take over. Just take over. I'm out.
Okay. Mongolia is known for being very big and empty, which makes it perfect for animals to graze. In terms of wildlife, Mongolia is a horse haven. They're often seen as the national animal. There's even a wind horse in their emblem. And just like we discussed in other Central Asian country videos, the horse has played such a huge role in Mongolian history from transport, riding, food, milk, and sport. It is estimated that about 13 times more horses and 30 times more sheep live in the country than actual people. In fact, Mongolia is the home of the last truly wild horses in the world known as taki. The horses have 66 chromosomes, 2 more than your average horse. Otherwise, the famous two-hump Bactrian camel are also national treasures. They even have a festival devoted to them. Other species like the saiga antelope and their weird noses roam around the grassland, and about
Hey man, don't call their noses weird. What if they're sensitive?
1/3 of the world's snow leopard population lives in Mongolia.
Oh, look at that good old kitty cat. Look at that thing. It's totally not gonna eat my face. I'm gonna pet it.
Mongolia.
But Ken, what about their economy? Don't they have like a bunch of minerals or something?
Yes, they do. Mongolia focuses on 2 main industries, herding and mining. Minerals make up about 80% of their exports, mostly in gold and copper. However, both sectors have been in decline for the past decades in favor of service jobs. Mongolia is also the second largest producer of cashmere goat wool in the world after China. They have the second largest population of yaks, again after China, which they use for milk and dairy. Speaking of which, food. First of all, no. Mongolian beef barbecue is a Chinese invention. It is not authentic Mongolian food. You have authentic dishes like arul, which is dehydrated curdled milk cheese. You have the national drink, ayrag, which is a fermented milk often from horses.
I have a feeling we're gonna get a lot of like milk.
Baked sheep meat called horhog, bodog, which is this inside-out cooked meat thing. And finally, booze dumplings. Yeah,
Only 4 different items? Ken, you could have done
a
better.
lot of meat and dairy. It's just part of their culture. And speaking of culture,
Thank you, Ken. You sound really enthusiastic when you do these things. You like doing this, don't you?
I am enthusiastic.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, get back to the camera.
Okay.
Now, growing up with Korean culture, I was always kind of under the influence that Mongolians are kind of like the mystical ancestors of all East Asians, and there's kind of a tincture of truth to that. First of all, the country has about 3.1 million people and is the most sparsely populated sovereign state in the world with only about 2 people per square kilometer. The vast majority of the country, at about 95%, identify as Mongolian or one of the main Mongolian people groups like the Buryats or Dorvod, Bayad, and so on, whereas the remaining 5% come from a variety of minorities, mostly Kazakhs and Russians. They use the Mongolian Togrog as their currency, they use the type C and E plug outlets, and they drive on the right
Damn right they do. The correct side of the road, you bitches.
side of the road. Now, what does
Never
it mean
getting
to
rid
be
of the bit.
Mongolian in the 21st
Admit to
century?
the bit.
Well, for one, the language. Mongolian is a unique tongue spoken with some interesting glottal stop sounds, strangely enough kind of similar to the ones that you find in the Inuit areas of the Arctic. Here's a clip from Easy Languages. I love these guys. They do such great street interviews. Check them out.
Улаанбаатар хотын талаар бидэнд ярьж өгөөч. Улаанбаатар хот маань ер нь 360 хэдэн жилийн түүхтэй. Манай одоо хамгийн сайхан хот юм нэг.
And keep in mind, there isn't just one type of Mongolian, but rather a few distinct cousin groups like the Altai, the Buryats, the
man is yoked. This man is built. Like, he's not like, he clearly doesn't have like a defined chest because he's not like, aesthetic. But like, look at those arms. This man is beefy. Anyway.
Kalmyks, mostly found in modern-day Russia or the Inner Mongolian regions of China. Each has a distinct dialect and tradition. Some speak completely unintelligible Turkic-based languages, but overall, they're all cousins. Geography Ongor said, if you locked a Mongolian, Buryat, Kalmyk, Inner Mongolian, and a Tuvan in a room, it would look kind of like this. What are your hobbies, Kalmykia?
I like to drawing pictures.
What about you, Tuva?
Me like having this for...
Yeah, Tuva would probably have a little more trouble communicating, but they're all definitely family. Now, the interesting thing is that although Mongolia has always kind of been like a lightly populated nation, it's always been the genetic source for billions of people. How did this happen? Well, in a nutshell, the Mongolian Empire. You may have heard of it. Although anthropologists have been able to trace East Asian ancestry originally through the human migration patterns that passed through India and the Middle East, the Mongolian invasions of the 13th century greatly shifted the genetic structure for what would become billions of people. Geneticists have been able to trace the Y chromosome common protogener in at least 17 million people alone that are directly descended from Genghis Khan. And that's just one Mongolian. Pretty interesting. Otherwise, in terms of faith, a little over half the population adheres to Buddhism, introduced shortly after the Mongolian Empire collapsed during the Yuan dynasty in China in the late 13th century. About a third are either traditional shaman or non-religious, and the remainder are mostly Christian or Muslim, especially the Kazakh people being Muslim. Mongolia today writes mostly in the Cyrillic alphabet. They adopted it in the 1940s during Soviet times. However, prior to that, they actually had their own writing system known as Hudum Mongol Bichik. It was written vertically left to right, inspired off the old Uyghur writing system. It almost went out of use, but today it has been reintroduced in schools and is trying to revive itself. Today you can see it on road signs, and even in Inner Mongolia they use it as a script as well. Culture-wise, there are too many things to list, but one thing you need to understand is that to this day, like many other Central Asian peoples, about a third of the entire country is still nomadic or semi-nomadic, choosing to live in yurt communities, housing made up of traditional circular living structures that can easily be broken apart and transported. They are huge on wrestling, or boh. They even have the world's largest wrestling event in the July game event known as Nadam, with over 6,000 competitors, no weight class, and it gets intense. The traditional style comes in many different forms, but essentially the men wear briefs, boots, and a zodog, or bare-chested jacket. As the legend goes, there was one occasion in which a woman beat all the wrestlers, ripping her jacket in the process, exposing her breasts, and since then all the jackets were made to expose the chests of the wrestlers, to make sure none of them were women. Otherwise, horse riding and archery are huge. Traditional Mongolian dance comes in a variety of styles, many inspired by the movements of animals like the falcon dance or the prancing lion dance. Another huge deal would be the traditional throat singing. I have been waiting so long to cover this because it is so cool. Basically, if you've never heard it, it's essentially a singing...
Of course he uses that clip of that from that screenshot from that video. Everyone has seen that video.
Style called overtone singing, which is done with two tones at once with the mouth, the regular voice, and the second one with an almost eerie sounding whistle. For example,
I really don't know how they do that. It's so cool.
how do they do that? It's like... Otherwise, Mongolia is huge on festivals. They have them throughout the entire year. Things like Sagan Sar, Mongolian New Year, with lots of fatty meat served. They have the Ice Festival, the Golden Eagle Festival, and so on. Okay, time to move on. History, in the quickest way I can put it. Proto-Mongolic Khanates. Mongolian tribes unify under Genghis Khan and the Mongolian Empire. Mongolian Empire is split up into 4 separate Khanates. China starts coming in. Mongolians convert to Buddhism, some to Islam. Also during this period, the Kalmyks moved to Kalmykia, which is now part of Western Russia. Nearly 2 centuries of rule under the Qing dynasty. A lot of political marriages between Mongols and Manchus. Late 19th century Han Chinese immigrants move into Inner and Outer Mongolia. 1911, Mongolia declares independence. Shortly after World War I, Mongolia decides to side with Russia and remove Chinese occupation. 1932 Monk Rebellion. Stalin's purge. They act as like a buffer for Russia and China during Sino-Soviet split. 1991, Mongolia becomes a democratic country. New buildings and pop culture comes in. And here we are today.
You know what, for the beginning of the history segment there was sounding pretty weak, especially in comparison to Monaco. Was Monaco the last one we watched? Whatever the last Geography Now video that we watched before this one, that one had a really good history section. Beginning of this one was a little weak, but Barbie sealed it at the end there with the 20th century history being more fleshed out. So that was pretty good. That was
Some
good.
notable people
Good
of
job.
Mongolian descent or from Mongolia might include Moldu Chanyu, Tan Shi Huai, Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan, obviously, and the various
Never heard of
khans
him.
that followed after him, Sorgak Tani Beki, the 4th Dalai Lama, Vachim, and this poet guy, Myangat, Di Dagbadorj, Natsagdorj, Jug, the cosmonaut, this guy. Yeah, a Mongolian person went up to space. And speaking of the grand scope of the world,
Bum, bum.
now, Mongolia did have the second largest empire throughout all of history, right after the British. So they've always kind of had a way of dealing with a lot of people across the world, I guess you could say. Outside of Asia, Germany and the USA have close ties. They're one of the few countries that had consulates in the early 20th century. They have the largest communities of Mongolians abroad in diaspora. They are also countries where Mongolians prefer to work and travel to, and about 2% of the population can speak German today. And many are learning English as well. Mongolia kind of has a little bit of a crush on South Korea and Japan. Pop culture and dramas are super popular. Tons of Koreans and Japanese restaurants are everywhere, and the two are super comfortable when they meet each other. Many Mongolians also have taken part in sumo wrestling, including this guy who became Yokozuna. Kazakhstan and Turkey are kind of like the newer but technically old friends, as they see Mongolia as kind of like an ancestor to their people. Both have great interest and respect whenever the word Mongolia is brought up. In terms of their best friends, however, many Mongolians might say Russia because they didn't want China to overtake them. Although Mongolia never became a Soviet republic, they did kind of act as like a buffer zone between the two countries, especially during the Sino-Soviet split. To this day, many Mongolians even speak Russian. Russians come in all the time, and the two nations have just been generally very close, especially during the turn of the 20th century. In conclusion, with Mongolia, you have a very vast open space inhabited by few people, but these people hold a very important secret that Asia could not live without. Stay tuned, Montenegro is coming up next.
And now the geography now, Mongolia. This was okay, but it also kind of feels weird because Monaco was the last one, I believe. Going from super tiny Monaco and then here to Mongolia, and the videos being roughly the same length, but Mongolia probably should get more time than Monaco. Especially in like a history segment, even though they don't do history here, this is geography. I feel like they could have, I don't know, it just feels a little off going from Monaco to Mongolia, but having them be roughly like the same runtime in video length. So it feels oddly paced to me. Just yeah. But, oh well. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.